Welcome back to Origins, our Minisode edition. This is the podcast that dives deep into the business of venture capital, where we learn how the people behind the capital, both GPs and LPs, make decisions. I'm Nick Chirls, GP at Asylum Ventures.
And I'm Beezer Clarkson, your LP co-host from Sapphire Partners, where we aim to invest in exceptional early-stage venture capital managers, ranging from emerging to established franchise VCs. And I'm very excited to unpack our recent conversation with Dan.
Me too. Where should we start?
Oh, gosh. He's so thoughtful on so many subjects. Okay, well, what's ringing in my ears to start with is he encapsulated what always aggravates me about half the social media posts, which is people just repeat stuff without really questioning, is it right? And is it true now? Or am I just paraphrasing?
Everything I write about is kind of addressing the three words in venture capital that annoy me the most, which is like what we see or what I see. There's so much of this like presenting anecdotes as data and evidence. So I love to like try and investigate things and get to the bottom of them a little bit more.
As somebody said, in venture, power law is always really important, or always have a concentrated strategy, or always be raising money because you never know when you can't raise. And he says, probably, maybe not. Let me do the research. Love that.
Yeah, he's kind of a unique being. I didn't realize he's like in the countryside in Wales. That was maybe my first takeaway, which is funny. You see people on Twitter, I guess, in the venture ecosystem, you just assume they're in, New York or SF or London or whatever, or in your case, I guess, Austin. But yeah, he's out there in the countryside doing the real work.
His research always makes me stop and think and wonder if we all just getting lucky half the time with our investments, and that we should all just be doing a lot more research to actually be thoughtful about how we get lucky.
I don't know. At the end of the day, it comes down to that leap of faith, no matter what, I think.
In the entrepreneur?
Or the manager or the VC.
I completely, obviously, OpenLP. I mean, Origins, I obviously care deeply about the communication of information. I don't think your portfolio construction should be your arbitrage in how to be a great investor. I think the industry would benefit from everybody understanding portfolio construction and choosing their path. But it's been consistency for me from an LP perspective, how the math of portfolio construction impacts returns. So that doesn't feel new on the LP side. And I also think it's also been consistent that it's hard for LPs to take on wildly new business models. So I think some of the models on either side kind of get pushed back, which I didn't talk about this with Dan because I just felt a little bit too much of a rabbit hole. But it's fascinating because they're PE funds that are highly concentrated, right? You do a lower middle market, whatever fund, you could have a dozen companies in it. And so it's not that LPs don't see this behavior. They completely see this behavior. It's just within a paradigm where your loss ratios are consistently lower and there's a lot more times to add on and build. So, I mean, I sort of would like to assume that the LP thinking around portfolio construction comes from being educated by seeing it in different industries and different aspects, and then applying it to venture and saying what feels appropriate given the risk reward. And I don't know if all the venture GPs have that perspective.
The other interesting tidbit that I thought was the idea that if you have more companies in the portfolio, you're willing to take more risk.
There's research that shows GPs with a more diversified portfolio have a greater risk appetite because they know they can afford more misses. And that actually connects with greater outperformance.
I'm wondering if that resonated with you, or if that's something you've thought on previously.
I have not. I've always been fascinated by this concept of risk tolerance and propensity to take risk and who likes what risk, because I mostly feel the reverse, which is people try to construct these portfolios with like, oh, I can do singles and doubles and I'll get to a 3x net, which we just have not seen. It could happen. We haven't seen. Or you get the other side of it, which I was sort of joking around on the pod about, like, we're going to live on Mars and do all these things with drones, even the ones that you hate delivering food. And that might be true, but it's not true tomorrow. But if you don't swing for the fences, you're not going to hit it here. And so what is the thinking of the manager? And you as a bit of my prime example, that's always out there ahead of the market, but not so far ahead these things don't get funded. And we don't build profiles of GPs here. I know managers build profiles of CEO types. But I am conscious of this, how people talk about risk and how they think about risk. And are there things that you can do in your firm that help express the risk? And this, I thought it was fascinating that he was talking about that as a specific behavior. And what it also brought up for me was that one of our managers was talking about a different aspect of the same thing, which was they wanted a slightly larger fund. Their math was they needed a certain number of checks per check writer. And I was pushing them on this because I said, well, that's not how returns work, right? Like you don't get more money because you have more check writers. And they said, yes, but if my junior partners can't write a certain number of checks, they don't take the right risk. And so it was this interesting that they were doing this math on how do I motivate the right behavior at the same time being mindful of my portfolio construction and if the fund's too big for the market. It was all these different things, but it was the same thing about how do you motivate the right quote unquote level of risk for what you're trying to do. Because I think it's really important.
Have you seen themes in risk profile across fund ones, fund twos, fund threes, fund fours? Because I can imagine like, a fund one is like, you could imagine it both ways. Like you could imagine a manager being like, actually, you know what? I don't want to take that much risk. I just want to like keep things okay and like try to get to the next fund. You could also imagine a manager being like, fuck it, fund one, like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'll go do something else. And if it works great, then awesome. I'll go. And then later funds, you could also imagine it both ways in the sense that like, I'm on 3 on fund 4, getting a little bit older, I don't maybe have the stomach for it in the way that I did and maybe in my 20s or early 30s or whatever. But you could also imagine like, I've done great. I made a bunch of money, and like, fuck it. I might as well go big because that'll move the needle. So I'm curious if you've seen themes there.
Oh, gosh, I wish I had anecdotes for all of those.
Or maybe even the specific, if you have 1 or 2 managers in mind where maybe the risk profile has changed over time without necessarily naming names.
As much as I wish I had been able to have those conversations, I think the closest to it is some of the conversations with folks around, as an angel, do you invest differently than institutional? And I suspect it depends on the person, which is a crappy answer. What I do feel is pretty consistent amongst true emerging managers, which is different from people who have done it and then spun out. And I'm going to stress test this against what you've seen. I think for folks, knowing what great looks like, forget about their risk tolerance, but maybe not. It's somewhat coupled with risk tolerance. If you know what a great founder looks like or a great potential, I think mostly I see emerging managers learning that curve. And maybe they meet some people early on, which is awesome. And we love that. Or maybe they think they know what great is, but they're actually not. They're actually not. And then as they discover it and see it, you realize what this looks like and feels like. And so and then also coupled with that is when you get referrals from folks, a lot of emerging managers, it's very, very typical. You start out getting referrals from other venture funds because they want you to do whatever it is that you're great at. Or it's too small for them or too whatever. And then as people build their network, they start getting more direct founder references, but again, I think it comes down to recognizing who you want to back. And that's not sure it's risk tolerance, but it definitely comes down. It feels to me that people are like, oh, I didn't realize this market was too small. This founder had this challenge that they couldn't get over. This team had this. I didn't realize I had to listen for XYZ. That's my ramble. How does that fit? Because you did this. You have all your colleagues.
I was thinking about the answer to my own question, which was, I actually don't think my risk tolerance has changed much in terms of number of companies per fund. Maybe like a touch, but not like maybe we started out, I think our first couple funds at Notation were like high 20s per number of companies. And now maybe we're like low to mid 20s. So that hasn't changed that much, like maybe a few companies per fund. What I do think has changed, and perhaps this is speaking to your question of just, if I'm honest with myself, this is probably true. Like at the end of the day, there's only really like a handful of things every year that I'm truly, truly excited about. I am more comfortable writing like larger first checks into those, partly because I've also seen the power law play out in our own portfolios, and I'm less concerned about losing money as I was in the very, very beginning. Yeah, really unique opportunities are just so rare. And so I'd rather write a bigger check up front than perhaps what we were doing 10 years ago at the beginning of Notation. So I think my risk profile has probably changed a little, like as in I'm willing to take a little bit more risk than I was 10 years ago. It's probably not dramatically different. And partly that's just driven by a little more confidence in my own ability 10 years later.
How do you think about assessing the risk of your co-investors and maybe motivating or maybe pulling in? The same question you asked me, but back, because you see the direct investors. I mean, you experience it in many respects more in the day-to-day than I do.
I actually don't know if I have a good answer there for others. Or I don't know if there's good rules to generalize from. What I have noticed recently is, maybe this is just some of the short-termism of the market, but I have found that, without naming names, folks are sort of like willing to give up and move on quicker than I think they used to, in terms of with companies, in the sense that, like, there's the really hot AI company, then there may be some companies that are in the middle. I think there was a sense 5 or 10 years ago of, like, maybe for better or for worse, by the way, I don't know what the right answer is, of sort of like sticking with the company, bridging it, continuing to see them through. And there's obviously good examples of like that not working. And then there's good examples of, like, Trade Desk or something where it like needed a few extra rounds to really take off, that were phenomenally good investments. I think there's less willingness in the venture community to sort of see things through hard periods.
Fascinating. All right. Well, to be continued.
Let's wrap. Thanks so much, Beezer. This was great, as always. And see you next time.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this Minisode of Origins, the show where we discuss the venture capital ecosystem through the lens of myself, a GP, and my co-host Beezer, an LP. Our show is produced by Sapphire Ventures in partnership with Pod People.
We'll be back soon with a new episode of Origins. You can find that right here in this feed. And while you're there, please rate and review the podcast. It's truly super helpful for other folks looking for venture insights to find our show, and really, really helpful for Nick and I to know what you want to hear. You can also keep an eye out for more by following Nick and I, as well as OpenLP, on X and LinkedIn. I'm Beezer Clarkson.
And I'm Nick Chirls, and we'll be back soon. Thanks for listening.